What if the stranger who walked into your life, carrying a photo of your mother, held the key to a secret buried for decades? One that could shatter everything you thought you knew about your past? Chloe Parker had always found solace in the hum of the diner. It was a place where time slowed down, a refuge from the world outside that seemed always too fast, too cold. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills of San Francisco, Chloe slipped into the rhythm of the night shift, wiping down the counter, pouring endless cups of coffee, and exchanging idle words with the handful of regulars who found comfort in her company. The diner was her life, her sanctuary, a small corner of the world that she could control. Her world was quiet, predictable until that night. The bell above the door jingled, and Chloe barely looked up, used to the sound. Another customer, probably looking for a late-night snack or a cup of coffee to chase away the weight of their day. But when she glanced up, expecting the usual weary traveler or an old regular, her eyes locked with the figure that had entered, and everything inside her stilled. He was nothing like the others. He wasn't just another tired, lonely soul seeking a brief moment of comfort. No, this man commanded the room the moment he walked in, his presence so undeniable it felt like the diner itself had paused to take notice. His sharp suit clung to his frame, its immaculate cut suggesting wealth, serious wealth. There was an air about him, something unspoken, yet immediately clear. He was used to being in control, used to being the one who walked into a room and made it his own. Chloe tried not to stare, but her eyes followed him anyway. He moved with a quiet confidence, his gaze sweeping the room as if he owned every inch of it. The man had the air of someone who had everything, yet nothing about him felt welcoming. He wasn't here for connection. He was here for something else. Chloe knew that much instantly. He chose a booth by the window, his eyes immediately fixed on the city streets outside. His back was straight, his posture rigid, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. For a fleeting moment, Chloe wondered what a man like him could possibly be doing in a diner like hers, tucked away from the polished glass and chrome world of corporate boardrooms and private jets. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. This wasn't her world. Her world was here, behind the counter, among the people who had become familiar with her over the years. She approached him like she had done with countless others before him, but there was something different in the way she moved this time. Something in her instinct told her that this encounter would not be like the others. She had no reason to feel that way, yet she couldn't shake the thought. "Can I get you anything?" Chloe asked, her voice steady, but a hint of curiosity slipping into her words. He didn't look up. His voice, when it came, was low, but not unkind. "Black coffee." Chloe nodded, making a quick note on her pad. It was a simple order, but there was nothing simple about the man sitting in front of her. She left him alone for a few moments, her thoughts drifting back to the strange weight in the air that seemed to linger in the space between them. What was it about him? Why did he feel so different? When she returned with the coffee, he still didn't acknowledge her, his gaze locked firmly on the world outside the window. Chloe set the steaming cup down in front of him, but he didn't even glance at it, as if his mind was light years away. She wasn't offended. She had learned long ago that people like him didn't see people like her. To him, she was just part of the background, a fleeting moment in his day. But then, something unexpected happened. As Chloe turned to leave, she heard the soft sound of leather, the rustling of a wallet. The man was reaching for his wallet to pay, and in the process, a small photo slipped out, fluttering to the floor. Without thinking, Chloe bent down to pick it up. As she turned the photo over, her heart stopped. It was her mother, Lucinda Parker, the warm smile, the same eyes, the woman who had raised her alone, without a whisper of help from anyone, the woman who had never spoken about her past, the woman who had always kept her secrets so carefully hidden, even from Chloe. Her hands shook as she held the photograph, her mother's face, in the wallet of a man she had never seen before, A man who was clearly rich, a man whose wealth oozed from every fiber of his being. How could this be? Why was her mother's photo in his wallet? The world seemed to tilt, the edges of her vision blurring as her mind struggled to comprehend what she was holding. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. But there it was, the photo, her mother. And this man, this stranger, was the one holding it. Chloe's breath caught in her throat as she turned to him, holding the photo up, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Where did you get this?" His head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. His gaze was cool, calculating, but Chloe saw something flicker in his eyes, something almost imperceptible, something she couldn't quite place. For a split second, she thought she saw surprise, maybe even recognition. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by an impenetrable mask of indifference. "You must be mistaken," he said, his voice smooth, almost dismissive. He reached out and took the photo from her, sliding it back into his wallet with practiced ease, as if it meant nothing. As if it was just another object, another possession to him. But Chloe knew it wasn't nothing. It wasn't just a photograph. It was a key to a past her mother had never shared with her. A past that was now being dangled in front of her by a man who hadn't even bothered to explain why he had it. "This wasn't a mistake," Chloe said, her voice steadier now, stronger. Her pulse was pounding in her ears as she pressed on, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Why do you have a picture of my mother?" For the briefest moment his expression faltered, but only for a moment. Then, his face hardened once again. He didn't answer her question. He didn't owe her an answer, he seemed to say with his silence. The man stood abruptly, placing a crisp $100 bill on the counter as if the money could somehow erase the question that still hung in the air between them. As if the transaction could absolve him of the responsibility to explain himself. Chloe felt a knot tighten in her chest. She couldn't let him leave. She couldn't let this go. This man had a connection to her mother, and she had to know what it was. She couldn't live with the uncertainty. She moved quickly, nearly knocking over a tray in her haste, rushing out from behind the counter and into the night air. She saw him walking toward the sleek black car parked at the curb, the driver stepping out to open the door for him. Chloe's heart raced as she tried to close the distance between them, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. "Wait," she called, her voice strained. "Please, just tell me how you knew her." If for a moment she thought he might turn around, might speak. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, just enough to meet her gaze, his eyes cool and detached. Then, in a voice that held no emotion, he said, "Forget this." And with that, he was gone. The car door slammed shut behind him, and the vehicle roared to life, pulling away into the night. Chloe stood frozen on the sidewalk, her mind spinning, her body still. She had just encountered a man who had a photograph of her mother, a man who had walked into her life like a shadow, only to disappear as quickly as he had come. Her thoughts swirled. What did it mean? Who was he? And why had her mother's picture been in his wallet? Chloe couldn't let it go. She couldn't walk away from this. She needed answers. She had to know the truth. And no matter where that truth led her, she was ready to find it. The silence in Chloe Parker's small apartment was deafening. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the streetlights outside did little to drown out the storm of questions racing through her mind. She sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the laptop in front of her, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her heart still pounded from the encounter at the diner. No matter how hard she tried to dismiss it, the image of her mother's face in that stranger's wallet refused to leave her thoughts. Lucinda Parker. Her mother had always kept her past a secret, her history buried beneath layers of silence and unexplained gaps. Chloe had grown up with an ever-present sense of uncertainty, wondering about the pieces of her mother's life that were never shared. There were stories Lucinda had never told, faces she never spoke of, moments that never seemed to be part of the present. Chloe had grown accustomed to these absences, learning to accept them, to live with the mystery. But that photograph, the one that had fallen from the billionaire's wallet, had cracked open a door Chloe didn't even know existed. And now she couldn't close it. She couldn't ignore it. With a heavy sigh, Chloe turned her attention back to the laptop, the screen illuminated with an array of search results. She typed the name Elliot Stone into the search bar and pressed enter. The name, like a phantom, had haunted her thoughts ever since the man had walked into the diner. She knew nothing about him except what she had seen with her own eyes, a man of wealth, of power, of indifference. But there was something more, something in that fleeting moment when their eyes had met, something in the way he had carefully tucked her mother's photo back into his wallet. He knew more than he was letting on, and Chloe was determined to find out what. The articles that popped up were filled with the usual corporate accolades. Elliot Stone, CEO of Stone Innovations, a self-made billionaire. There were interviews with him, articles about his business empire, his philanthropic efforts, his influence in the tech world. Yet, there was nothing about his personal life, no mention of family, no photos with a wife or children, just a man and his business. But Chloe had already seen the cracks in that surface. She had seen the photo. She had seen the connection. Her eyes darted from one headline to another, absorbing every word, every detail, but nothing gave her the answers she needed. Elliot Stone had built an empire, yes, but there was no mention of the woman in the photo, no mention of her mother. And that frustrated Chloe beyond words. She needed more. She needed to understand why her mother's picture had been in his wallet. What was the connection? Why had her mother kept it hidden? And why had Elliot, of all people, been the one to hold it? Chloe scrolled down through more articles, trying to piece together anything that could offer a clue. But the more she searched, the more the mystery deepened. It was as if Elliot Stone's entire existence had been scrubbed clean of any trace of his past. But there was one name that kept appearing, a name tied to his business ventures, his charitable foundations, his connections. And that name was Lucinda Parker. The moment Chloe saw it, something inside her shifted. She clicked on the article, her heart racing, her fingers trembling slightly. The title read, Stone Innovations joins forces with Lucinda Parker Foundation to launch tech program for underserved communities. Chloe's eyes widened as she read the opening lines. There it was, her mother's name. Her mother, whose entire life had been about shielding Chloe from the past, whose every action had been shrouded in mystery, was tied to this man, Elliot Stone, in some way that Chloe couldn't yet understand. The article mentioned a partnership between Lucinda Parker and Elliot Stone that had lasted for years. The two had worked together on various philanthropic initiatives, particularly programs focused on providing technology access to underprivileged communities. But there was nothing personal in the article. No mention of the relationship between them, no mention of why her mother had never told Chloe about this man. Chloe clicked through more links, her mind whirling. She dug deeper into their professional connection, finding more articles about the foundation, more mentions of their collaboration. Yet every time she searched for something personal, something more intimate, the answers remained hidden. It was becoming clear to Chloe that the woman in that photo was not just another face from her mother's past. She had been part of something more, something Chloe hadn't been told. The sudden realization made Chloe's chest tighten. What had her mother been hiding from her all these years? Why had she kept this secret so carefully guarded? Chloe knew what she had to do next. She couldn't sit by any longer, searching through endless articles and jumping from one link to the next in a futile attempt to uncover the truth. No, she needed to confront Elliot Stone. She needed to hear it from him. She needed to understand the connection between him and her mother, between the photo she had found and the man who had disappeared from her life as quickly as he had entered it. But Chloe had no idea how to get close to him. She had no official reason to meet him. She couldn't just waltz into Stone Innovations and demand answers. But as the hours passed and the weight of the discovery settled deeper in her chest, Chloe's mind began to work, her thoughts sharpening with purpose. She knew she had to take matters into her own hands. She wasn't going to let Elliot Stone slip away without telling her the truth. She had to find a way to get to him. Chloe spent the next several hours brainstorming, making plans, and devising a way to gain access to Stone Innovations. She couldn't afford to waste time. This was her one chance. She knew the man would never meet with her voluntarily, but if she could get inside, if she could just get close enough to ask the questions she needed answers to, then maybe, just maybe, she could uncover the truth once and for all. By the time morning arrived, Chloe had a plan. It wasn't the most sophisticated scheme, but it would have to do. She was determined. She had no idea what she would find when she met Elliot Stone again, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. The photo, the mystery, the unanswered questions, they had all brought her to this point, and Chloe wasn't about to turn back now. Her pulse quickened as she prepared to leave, the taste of determination sharp in her mouth. She was about to embark on a journey into a past that had been hidden from her for so long, and she wouldn't stop until she had the answers. The city of San Francisco had always seemed so large to Chloe Parker, a sprawling maze of glass towers, winding streets, and anonymous faces. Yet, as she stood outside the imposing glass structure of Stone Innovations, the very building where the man she had been searching for worked, the world around her felt impossibly small. Every breath she took was heavy. Every step toward the door weighed down with an unspoken fear and a fierce determination that conflicted with one another. The photograph of her mother in Elliot Stone's wallet, Lucinda Parker, the woman who had raised her, protected her, and kept so many secrets, had altered everything. Chloe had spent hours combing through articles, piecing together fragments of a past she hadn't even known existed, a past her mother had never spoken of. And now, here she was, at the doorstep of the man who held the key to all of it, the man whose existence had been hidden from her. This was the man who knew more about her mother than Chloe ever had. She had no idea what to expect when she walked through those doors, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't leaving without answers. Chloe's feet moved almost automatically as she approached the sleek revolving doors of Stone Innovations. The building towered above her, its glass surface gleaming in the early morning light, reflecting the bustling city around it. People in tailored suits and heels walked briskly by her, their eyes fixed on whatever mission lay ahead of them, oblivious to the fact that Chloe Parker, a woman whose world had just been turned upside down, was about to step into their world. The world of power, wealth, and secrets. Her heart pounded in her chest as she entered the lobby. The vast open space filled with polished marble floors and steel columns that seemed to reach toward the sky. The air was cool, the kind of sterile coolness that reminded Chloe just how out of place she felt. She had never belonged to this world, and standing in the lobby of Stone Innovations, she was acutely aware of that fact. Chloe approached the front desk, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to steady her breath. The receptionist behind the desk looked up, her expression neutral, professional. Chloe, despite her nerves, forced herself to speak with as much confidence as she could muster. "I need to see Elliot Stone," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It's urgent." The receptionist barely glanced at Chloe, her fingers continuing to tap at the keyboard in front of her. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. "No," Chloe admitted, her stomach twisting. "But it's important." The woman's gaze flickered briefly over Chloe before she sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Mr. Stone doesn't take walk-ins." Chloe's pulse quickened. She had expected this. She had no appointment, no reason other than the burning need for answers to walk into this place. But she wasn't about to leave without trying. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the security guards by the elevators and the employees who passed through the turnstiles with their badges. It was clear to Chloe that getting past the front desk was going to be difficult. She had no official business here, no invitation, but there had to be a way in. Then her eyes caught sight of him, a young man, mid-20s, walking toward the elevator with a coffee cup in one hand and a folder in the other. He was distracted, his eyes fixed on his phone, and Chloe saw an opportunity. She moved quickly, stepping into his path just as he was about to approach the turnstile. "Excuse me," she said urgently, her voice low. "You forgot to send Mr. Stone that report he was expecting this morning." The man blinked, startled, and stopped in his tracks. "What report?" he asked, confusion clouding his expression. Chloe sighed, pretending to be exasperated. "The report. He needs it now. It was supposed to be delivered first thing this morning." She flashed him a smile, hoping to sell the lie. "I'm sure you're just too busy." Before he could respond, Chloe smoothly stepped forward, letting her body brush against his. As he hesitated, she followed the motion of his hand as he scanned his badge in front of the turnstile. The guard didn't seem to notice her at all. She was in. Her heart raced as she stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. This was it. She was finally going to face Elliot Stone. Chloe had no plan for what would happen next, no script for the confrontation that awaited her, but she was done waiting. The pieces of her mother's life, her secret life, had been scattered in front of her, and Chloe had every right to know the truth. She had a right to know what had been kept from her. The elevator doors slid open, and Chloe stepped out, her nerves flaring as she faced the sleek, polished reception area. A man in a dark suit approached her instantly, his gaze sharp, sizing her up as if he already knew she didn't belong here. "Miss," he said, his tone icy, "do you have an appointment?" "No," Chloe said, her voice unwavering. "But I need to see Elliot Stone. It's about my mother, Lucinda Parker." The man's eyes narrowed for the briefest moment, and Chloe could see the subtle shift in his demeanor. Something about her words, her mention of her mother's name, had caught his attention, but it was only a flicker, and then he was back to being the impassive gatekeeper, as if his job was to ensure that no one like Chloe ever set foot in this building. "Mr. Stone doesn't take walk-ins," the man said again, his voice hard, his posture rigid. "I'm not leaving until I speak to him," Chloe said, her voice calm but firm. "Tell him my mother's name was Lucinda Parker." The man hesitated. Chloe could see the internal debate flashing behind his eyes, but he didn't move for a long moment. Finally, he turned, disappearing down the hallway without another word. Chloe's heart thudded in her chest. She had made it this far, but there was still the question of what would happen next. Would Elliot Stone even see her? Would he acknowledge the connection between her mother and him? Would he have any answers? Minutes passed in agonizing silence, and Chloe stood frozen in the sleek, empty lobby. The sound of her own breathing felt loud in her ears. She couldn't back out now. She had come too far. Finally, the door to Elliot Stone's office opened. The man himself stepped out, and Chloe felt her breath catch in her throat. He was taller than she remembered, his presence still commanding, but now there was something different in his expression. It wasn't the cold indifference he had worn the night he had been in the diner. Now there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or regret. But whatever it was fleeting, and it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. He walked toward Chloe with a deliberate pace, his steps slow but confident. As he approached, his eyes studied her, taking in every detail as if trying to place her, to understand why she was standing in front of him. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice flat and controlled. "Come with me." Chloe followed him down the hallway, her heart pounding with every step. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She had finally found the man who held the answers to all of her questions. She had finally tracked down the man who had kept so many secrets about her mother's past, secrets that Chloe could no longer ignore. When they entered his office, Elliot turned to face her, closing the door behind them. The room was cold, immaculate, with walls lined with books and photographs of business deals, cityscapes, and awards. It was a room that exuded power and wealth, a room that felt like it belonged to someone who had long ago left any trace of vulnerability behind. Chloe stood still, her arms crossed in front of her, as she looked at the man who had been hiding so many pieces of her life. Her voice shook, but she didn't let that stop her. "Why do you have a picture of my mother?" she asked, her words coming out more forcefully than she expected. For a moment, Elliot didn't answer. He reached into his desk, pulling out a worn leather wallet. He opened it slowly and took the photo of Lucinda Parker from the inside. He placed it on the desk between them, as if it meant nothing, as if it was just another piece of paper, another business transaction. But Chloe could see the way his fingers trembled as he touched it. She could see the weight of the past pressing down on him. "I knew her," Elliot said quietly, finally meeting Chloe's gaze. "I loved her." The words hit Chloe like a punch to the gut. She wasn't ready for this. She hadn't prepared herself for this truth. The man who had walked out of her life without so much as a backward glance had loved her mother. The man who had kept her mother's photograph hidden in his wallet had loved her. Chloe's heart raced, and her thoughts spun out of control. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers for why he had left, why he had never come back, why her mother had never told her. But all that came out was a shaky whisper. "Why did you leave her?" Chloe stared at the photograph, her breath shallow, her pulse quickening. The image of her mother, Lucinda Parker, was now placed gently on the cold glass surface of Elliot Stone's desk. The glossy paper shimmered in the dim light, but Chloe's focus was on the man who had placed it there. The man who had somehow become the center of a puzzle that had consumed her. She had walked into this room, her heart full of questions, her mind racing with anger, fear, and confusion. And now, standing here, she could feel all the walls closing in around her, suffocating her in the weight of what she was about to learn. Elliot Stone, the billionaire whose wealth and influence had seemed untouchable to someone like her, was now just a man standing in front of her, carrying a secret that had been buried for decades. She had expected answers, but what she was about to hear would tear through her like a storm. The man who had been so detached from her world, so far removed from everything she knew, was about to tell her a story she was unprepared for. "I knew her," Elliot's voice broke the silence, his words heavy as though they carried the weight of 1,000 regrets. He looked down at the photograph for a long moment, his fingers tracing its edge, almost as if he was afraid to meet her gaze. When his eyes finally lifted to hers, there was something in them, an emotion Chloe couldn't quite name. It wasn't the cold indifference she had grown used to. This was something deeper, something raw. But whatever it was buried beneath layers of pain, shame, and guilt. "I loved her," Elliot said again, this time his voice cracking slightly. There was no arrogance in his words, no air of superiority, only raw vulnerability. A man standing in front of her, his defenses stripped away, revealing the truth he had spent so many years hiding. Chloe's heart seemed to stop for a moment. She had braced herself for many things. She had expected anger, frustration, maybe even lies. But this truth was something she hadn't prepared for. It cut through her like a blade, carving open parts of her heart she had long kept locked away. She had known her mother had loved and lost, but this was something else entirely. The man who had disappeared from her life, who had let her mother carry the burden of raising her alone, had once loved her, and now, standing here, he was finally admitting it. But why? Why had he left? Why had her mother kept him a secret? Why had Chloe been kept in the dark all these years? "Why did you leave her?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper, but it hung in the air like an unanswered prayer. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She wasn't sure what she expected from him, but she was certain of one thing. The answers she had been searching for were still just out of reach. Elliot exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening as though the question had struck a chord he had spent years burying. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if weighing the decision to answer her, to truly explain himself. Chloe watched him, her eyes fixed on his face, searching for something, anything, that would help her understand why this man had torn apart her mother's life, why he had abandoned them both, leaving nothing but silence and a photograph that now felt like a cruel reminder. "I was a coward," Elliot said, the words bitter on his tongue. "My family made it clear that if I stayed with Lucinda, I'd lose everything. My inheritance, my place in the business world, my future. They told me that if I chose her, I would be cutting myself off from everything I had worked for. And in the end, I made the choice. I walked away from her. I thought I could come back for her later, after I had secured my future, after I had built everything I needed to succeed." Chloe's chest tightened as the weight of his confession sank in. The words burned, each one a reminder of the cold, calculating decisions made by a man who had chosen power and wealth over love, over her mother, over everything that had mattered. He had left Lucinda because he was too weak to fight for her. He had chosen the comfort of his family's approval, the false security of money, over the woman he had claimed to love. "And what happened when you came back?" Chloe's voice trembled with both anger and sorrow, the question slipping out before she could fully control it. "What happened when you finally realized what you had lost? What happened when you realized you had a child? A daughter who grew up without a father because of you?" Elliot's face darkened, the muscles in his jaw tensing. His eyes, which had once been so guarded, now seemed to carry the weight of every decision he had ever made. "By the time I realized what I had done," he said softly, his voice laced with regret, "Lucinda was gone. She had disappeared. I tried to find her. I hired private investigators. I searched for years, hoping, praying that I could undo the damage I had caused. But she had cut me out of her life. She made it clear that she didn't want me, and she made sure that I could never find her." Chloe's heart twisted painfully in her chest. She had always known that her mother had carried some sort of secret, but this was a betrayal of a magnitude that was impossible to ignore. Lucinda had kept the truth from her, had shielded her from the reality of her own existence. Chloe had never known the depth of the sacrifices her mother had made, never understood the weight of the pain Lucinda had borne in silence. And now, the man who had hurt her so deeply, the man who had abandoned them both, was standing in front of her, asking for forgiveness. Chloe wanted to scream, to shout at him for all the years she had spent wondering why her mother had never talked about him, why she had never told her the truth. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, a hollow emptiness settled over her. The truth had been revealed, but it only left more questions in its wake. How could she forgive him? How could she ever look at him and see anything but the man who had torn her family apart? "You never once tried to reach out to me," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "Not once. You never even thought about me, about the life I had to live without a father. You never cared enough to come back, to fix it. You just walked away and left us to pick up the pieces." The anger that had been simmering inside her for so long finally erupted, her voice rising in frustration. "How could you do that to us, to her, to me?" Elliot's face softened, his eyes filled with an emotion Chloe couldn't quite name. Guilt, perhaps. Or was it sorrow? Maybe it was both. "I thought I could make it right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But by the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late. And I'm sorry, I am, but I can't change the past. All I can do now is be honest with you, be honest about what happened. And I know that doesn't change anything, Chloe. I know it doesn't fix the hurt, but I want you to know that I regret it every single day." The silence that followed felt thick, suffocating. Chloe stood frozen, her thoughts in a whirlwind. She had come here searching for answers, but what she had found was something far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. The man who had been absent from her life, the man who had abandoned her mother, was now standing before her, revealing the truth. But the truth, as it turned out, was not as simple as she had hoped. Elliot Stone was not just a man who had made a choice. He was a man haunted by that choice, a man who had lived with the consequences of his actions for far too long. But was that enough? Could she forgive him for the years he had taken from her, for the years he had stolen from her mother? Could she forgive him for the choices that had left her with nothing but questions, confusion, and a deep ache in her heart? Chloe didn't know the answer. The weight of his confession still hung in the air, pressing down on her, and she realized that this moment was only the beginning of a journey she wasn't sure she was ready to take. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Chloe said, her voice barely audible. The words were painful, but they were honest. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him. Not yet. Elliot nodded slowly, his face full of understanding. "I don't expect you to," he replied quietly. "But I'm here, Chloe. I'm here if you ever want to talk, if you ever want to know me, not as the man who abandoned you, but as the man I should have been." Chloe stood there, staring at the man who had once loved her mother, who had once promised her everything and then walked away. She had so many emotions swirling inside her: anger, pain, confusion, and something else, something she couldn't quite define. All she knew was that, for the first time, she wasn't sure where this journey would lead. But the truth had been revealed, and that, for better or for worse, was the first step toward healing. Chloe stood at the window, her gaze lost in the sprawling city below. San Francisco, with its winding streets and towering buildings, seemed so vast from this height, like a world of its own. Yet, in the quiet of this moment, it felt like it had shrunk to nothing more than a reflection of her own feelings, confused, distant, full of questions. The revelations of the past few days had been too much to process all at once. The truth about her mother, the truth about Elliot Stone, the secrets that had been buried for so long, it all hung over her like a thick fog, making it impossible to see clearly. She had come to the city looking for answers, but what she had found was a story tangled in regret, loss, and unspoken truths. And as she stood there, looking out at the city she had always known, Chloe realized that the most difficult part of this journey wasn't finding the truth. It was what to do with it once it was in her hands. The truth about Elliot, about her mother, about the life she had lived without the answers she so desperately needed, had been laid bare. But now, standing on the edge of that truth, Chloe had to make a choice: to continue living in the shadow of the past or to find a way to step forward into something new. For the longest time, Chloe had been trapped in the memory of a life that had never quite been hers. She had lived in the spaces between the stories her mother had never told, in the silences that had surrounded their home. She had always felt like there was something missing, some piece of her life that wasn't quite right, but she had never known what it was. Now, with the truth about Elliot and her mother finally uncovered, she realized that what had been missing all along was the understanding of who she was, where she came from, and the courage to define her own future. But that didn't come easily. For all the clarity she had gained, for all the answers she had found, Chloe still felt adrift, like a ship that had been set on a course but was unsure of where to go. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, they were all still there, simmering beneath the surface, threatening to pull her under. And yet, somewhere within her, there was also a spark of hope. A small flame that refused to be extinguished. She turned away from the window, her mind focused on the one thing that had begun to guide her in the days since her confrontation with Elliot: her mother's necklace, the one Lucinda had kept hidden, tucked away for Chloe to find. The pendant, with its simple engraving: "Forgive, love, begin." The words seemed so small, so simple, yet they carried so much weight. They were the key to everything. The key to healing, to moving forward, to accepting the past without letting it dictate the future. Chloe had carried that pendant with her for days, and now, as she stood in the quiet of her apartment, it felt like it had finally begun to make sense. The journey wasn't just about finding out what had happened in the past, it was about choosing what to do with that knowledge. Choosing to forgive, choosing to love, choosing to begin again. Chloe had never imagined that forgiveness would be so difficult. She had always thought of forgiveness as something you give to others, something you offer when you're ready to move on. But what she had learned through the tangled emotions of the past week was that forgiveness wasn't just about the other person, it was about herself. It was about releasing the weight of anger, the burden of resentment, and making space for something new to grow. She couldn't change what had happened, couldn't undo the years of silence and secrets, but she could choose to let go of the past, to let go of the pain it caused her mother, and to move forward into a future that was hers to create. It wasn't going to be easy. The scars were too deep for that. The wounds were still fresh, still raw. But Chloe knew that she had no other choice. She couldn't spend the rest of her life buried in the pain of the past. She couldn't allow herself to be trapped by the choices others had made. She had to find her own path, her own way forward. And that path, for the first time, was not defined by the secrets her mother had kept or the mistakes Elliot had made. It was defined by Chloe herself. As she reached for the pendant, the cool metal in her hand felt grounding, familiar. The words, forgive, love, begin, were more than just a message. They were a promise that she could heal, a promise that, despite everything, she could still create a future that was her own. And so, Chloe made the decision to take that first step. The next morning, she found herself outside Stone Innovations once again, standing in front of the towering glass building that had once seemed so alien to her. But today, it didn't seem so distant. Today, it was just another part of the journey. The journey that she had started when she first learned the truth about her mother and the man who had left them both behind. She had come to this place to confront the past, but now, standing outside, Chloe realized that she was ready to leave the past behind. She wasn't here for revenge or to make Elliot feel the weight of the years he had spent running from his own choices. She wasn't here to demand answers anymore. She had heard them, and they had been enough. Today, she was here to reclaim something for herself, her peace, her future, her freedom. She entered the building with a newfound sense of purpose, her steps more confident, her head held high. As she walked toward the elevator, she could feel the weight of the past lifting with every step she took. She wasn't walking into the world of power and wealth that Elliot represented. She was walking into her own future, one that was still uncertain, but one she was finally ready to shape. When she reached the top floor, she didn't hesitate. She walked straight past the receptionist and into the office where she had once confronted Elliot. The space still felt cold, imposing, but today it felt different to Chloe. Today, it felt like just another room in her life, a room she had entered with strength and conviction. She could see Elliot sitting at his desk, his face unreadable, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of something. Maybe it was regret, maybe it was guilt, but whatever it was, Chloe didn't let it stop her. She had already forgiven him. She didn't need him to ask for it again. Chloe, Elliot said quietly, his voice laced with surprise. What are you doing here? She took a deep breath, standing tall in front of him. I'm here because I need to move on, she said, her voice steady, her words clear. I'm not here for you to apologize again. I'm not here to relive the past. I'm here because I need to take control of my own future. Elliot didn't say anything for a long moment. His gaze lingered on her, and Chloe could feel the weight of his presence, but it no longer affected her. She was done carrying that weight. I'm moving on from this, she continued, her eyes never leaving his. I'm done with the secrets, done with the lies, and I'm done letting the past define me. I've forgiven you, Elliot, but now I need to let go and step forward into something new. For me, Elliot's face softened, and for the first time, he seemed to understand. He nodded slowly, his lips pressed into a tight line. I understand, he said, his voice quieter than before. I hope you find what you're looking for, Chloe. I hope you find the peace you deserve. Chloe nodded once, then turned and walked out of the office. As she left Stone Innovations, the weight of the building, the weight of the past, felt lighter. She had made her choice. She had taken the first step toward a new beginning, and as she stepped back into the bustling streets of San Francisco, she knew that this was just the beginning. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew she was ready to face it, on her terms. Chloe Parker's journey was never meant to be easy. It was never meant to follow a clear path from start to finish, or to offer simple answers to the complex questions that had plagued her for so long. Her life, like the city she lived in, had been a maze of twists and turns, moments of clarity lost in a fog of silence and unspoken truths. But what began as a search for answers became so much more than that. It became a search for herself, a journey toward understanding the deeper, more painful aspects of her own identity, and ultimately, a journey toward healing and self-discovery. At the start of her story, Chloe was like so many of us, caught in the silence of things left unsaid, the weight of unresolved questions that defined her relationship with her mother. Lucinda Parker, Chloe's mother, had always kept her past hidden, offering only fragments of her life, carefully guarded and never fully revealed. Chloe grew up with this uncertainty, this feeling of something missing, but without ever knowing exactly what it was. The sudden appearance of Elliot Stone, the billionaire with a hidden connection to her mother, threw her world into chaos. And yet, it was in this chaos that Chloe found the catalyst for a transformation she had never anticipated. Her quest for answers led her to confront the past, both the secrets of her mother and the man who had once been a part of it. Elliot's admission that he had loved Lucinda, that he had left her for the sake of power and wealth, shattered everything Chloe had believed about her family. It was not just the truth of her mother's past that she had uncovered, but the deeper, more painful realization that her own life had been shaped by decisions made long before her birth. Her mother's silence, the secret love affair, the abandonment, all of it swirled around her, pushing her to question everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, and about forgiveness. But Chloe didn't just sit with the pain. She didn't let it consume her. Instead, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the truth, the betrayal, the anger, the grief. But then she made a choice. She made the choice to forgive, not for Elliot's sake, but for her own. She made the choice to let go of the past and step forward into something new. It wasn't easy. Forgiveness rarely is, but Chloe realized that in forgiving, she wasn't absolving the wrongdoers of their actions. She wasn't forgetting the hurt they caused. Instead, she was releasing the power the past held over her, and in doing so, she was reclaiming her own power, her own future. Chloe's journey was about more than just forgiving Elliot for the pain he had caused. It was about forgiving herself for the years she had spent living in the shadow of secrets, for the moments she had wasted on anger and resentment. It was about recognizing that, while she couldn't change the past, she had the power to shape her future. By choosing to let go of the weight of resentment, Chloe chose to live a life not defined by the mistakes of others, but by her own actions, her own choices. In the end, Chloe didn't just forgive Elliot, she forgave herself. She realized that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward. It's about finding the strength to break free from the chains of past mistakes and embracing the possibility of a new beginning, no matter how difficult that may seem. Chloe's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of forgiveness in our own lives. We often think that forgiveness is something we offer to others, a gift we extend to those who have wronged us. But in truth, forgiveness is just as much a gift to ourselves. Holding on to anger and resentment only serves to poison our own hearts, to trap us in a cycle of bitterness and pain. Forgiveness doesn't mean we condone the actions that hurt us. It simply means we choose not to let those actions define us. We choose to release the hold the past has on our lives and move forward, free from the weight of old wounds. In our own lives, we all face moments of pain, loss, and betrayal. We all encounter situations that challenge our ability to forgive, to understand, and to heal. But Chloe's story shows us that, no matter how difficult it may seem, forgiveness is not just an option, it's a necessity. It's the key to moving forward, to creating a future that is no longer chained to the mistakes of the past. Just like Chloe, we must confront our own truths, however painful they may be. We must allow ourselves to feel the hurt, to process the emotions that come with it, but we cannot allow those emotions to control us. We must learn to forgive others and ourselves so that we can take the first steps toward building a life that is truly our own, not defined by the actions of others, but by our own strength and resilience. This story teaches us that we all have the power to change our lives, to shape our futures, and to heal the wounds that have been inflicted upon us. But that power lies in our ability to let go of the past, to forgive, and to embrace the possibilities of a new beginning. The choice to forgive is not easy, and it's not quick, but it is transformative. It is the path to freedom, to peace, and to a life filled with the potential for growth and change. As you reflect on Chloe's journey, ask yourself, what parts of my past am I still holding on to? What bitterness, resentment, or anger is preventing me from moving forward? How can I begin to let go, to forgive, and to embrace a new beginning in my own life? The answers may not come all at once, but like Chloe, you have the power to find them. You have the strength to heal. And if you found inspiration in Chloe's story, if it resonated with you and sparked something inside you, I encourage you to support the channel by subscribing. Your support motivates us to continue bringing you content that inspires, challenges, and encourages growth. Every subscription helps us keep creating, keep telling these important stories, and keep exploring the lessons that can transform our lives. So, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey of self-discovery and empowerment. Together, we can continue learning from these stories and using their lessons to create better, more fulfilling lives. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to sharing more meaningful content with you in the future.